Hello. In 1891, Charles Taze Russell published the third volume of Millennial Dawn series, Thy Kingdom Come. And in this book, like in the previous two and the three to come, Russell was speculating upon the times and seasons, the mysteries that had puzzled Christians for, well, ever since the first century. And of course, his speculations led up to his, continued right up to his death and beyond it, because the seventh volume, The Finished Mystery, pretended to be the posthumous work of Pastor Russell. And of course, this book caused the persecution as well as the ridicule of the Watchtower Society in 1917 and beyond, because it was so full of not just prophetic speculation, but in fact the most bilious and vile of denunciations of religion outside the Watchtower. And of course it involved a good deal of circular reasoning that the faithful and discreet slave, the recently deceased Pastor Russell, was undoubtedly here, and he had to be here because the times and seasons were here. And of course the circular reason was that since the faithful and discreet slave was here, that was one of the proofs that the times must be as Russell himself had predicted, and Armageddon immediately upon us, if not in 1914, then in 1918 or 1920 or 1925. And of course there's a third element to the circular reasoning, which was that if we're being ridiculed and even persecuted and thrown in jail, then that itself becomes a proof that we are right, and that Pastor Russell was indeed the Laodicean messenger. Well, at the same time as all this was going on, the fever of World War I, 20 years before, when Russell had published Thy Kingdom Come, a very famous preacher, maybe the most important preacher, and today the most famous preacher of the Victorian era, the Baptist Charles Spurgeon, had died. He died in early 1892, and this was his last published book, The Gospel of the Kingdom. Now, in his book, by the way, a commentary on the entire Gospel of Matthew, Spurgeon doesn't engage in chronological computations and speculation on times and seasons. In fact, he warns us of the foolishness of preaching before unbelievers that which is, that which would comprise the greatest mysteries of the faith, not just prophecy, but even theological mysteries such as doctrines of atonement and predestination and the Trinity. Here's how Spurgeon reasons on the foolishness of preaching such abstruse doctrines to those who aren't even born again, according to Christian definitions. He's talking about the text in the Sermon on the Mount where Christ says, "Give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast ye your poor pearls before swine, lest they trample them under feet and turn again and rend you." Then Spurgeon says about this passage, "When men are evidently unable to perceive the purity of a great truth, do not set it before them. They are like mere dogs, and if you set holy things before them, they will be provoked to turn again and rend you. Holy things are not for the profane. Without are dogs. They must not be allowed to enter the holy place. When you are in the midst of the vicious, who are like swine, do not bring forth the precious mysteries of the faith, for they will despise them and trample them under their feet in the mire. You are not needlessly to provoke attack upon yourself or upon the higher truths of the gospel. You are not to judge. You are not to act without judgment. Count not men to be dogs or swine, however, but when they avow themselves to be such, or by their conduct act as if they were such, do not put occasions in their way for displaying their evil character. Saints are not to be simpletons. They are not to be judges, but also they are not to be fools." And then he ends with a prayer-like gesture. "Great King, how much wisdom thy precepts require. I need thee, not only to open my mouth, but also at times to keep it shut." So Spurgeon does not like the tendency that he obviously saw in his own time, in the late Victorian era, of the church to veer off into strange speculations, and even worse, to be preaching meat unto, well, unconverted. Has history vindicated Charles Russell or Charles Spurgeon? Was the kingdom that Russell predicted, that was certain to come in 1914, a vindication of the Watchtower's prophetic speculation? Or is history, 130 years of history now, vindicated Charles Spurgeon in his approach? This is another way of asking the question, is the kingdom of the Watchtower, the one they're still hooking to times and seasons, the one that is still being proclaimed door to door, is this the real biblical kingdom, or is it a counterfeit kingdom? Which subject we should say for another video. But it's not only cultic groups who can learn from Spurgeon's words. Russell was indeed the indiscreet, foolish slave, not the faithful and discreet slave. But Christians too often put the toughest truths of theology in front of unconverted and are outraged when they're mocked. Spurgeon says the gospel simplicity is for children. Milk, not meat. Is this true for children only? Is it not also true for unbelievers? If we are to put milk, not meat, before our children, who are after all born, should we not put something even simpler before the unbeliever? Not expect them to believe in the more mature truths of Christianity. I believe if we do that, we'll be living in obedience with the trends of the early church. If you look at the preaching of the earliest disciples in the book of Acts, you'll see the simplicity of the gospel in its pure form, unadulterated milk belonging to the Word. Charles Spurgeon, The Gospel of the Kingdom.